Hello, everybody. My name is Yarnel Nicholas. I would like to thank you so much for paying attention to my presentation. Today, I would like to be talking to you about the question of public will and private action, the power of the negative in the Reagan's Just Say No morality campaign. This, of course, was written by Susan Mackey Kallis and Dan F. Hann, and it's presented by yours truly. Excuse me for a moment. Now, keep in mind, the year was 1986. A lot of things has been going on in that particular year. Of course, the space shuttle had, of course, exploded. Martin Luther King Day was now a federal holiday, save, of course, for Arizona. And The Cosby Show was #1 in the ratings in happier times. On September 14th, 1986, President Ronald and First Lady Nancy Reagan appeared on national TV to espouse the dangers of drugs. Now, this is the actual video that I got via YouTube. Of course, if you're watching it on there, you might see the link. The link is right over here if you want to check it out for yourself. Let me see if I can make sure I got this right. But here's the actual footage of Mr. Reagan's espousing speech right here. But you can watch it for yourself. Now, this nationally televised speech was part of an ongoing effort on the war on drugs. Now, throughout the presentation, we'll be explaining in detail how the authors examined the Reagan social conservative views caused to examine the social ills. Now, this nationally televised speech was part of an ongoing effort to fight the war on drugs. And all right, Dad. For this paper, the authors have referenced Kenneth Burke's writings on the negative language. 4 essays were written in the late 50s in the Quarterly Journal of Speech. In this actual paper, Burke sees 2 sources of development in the language: the scientist and the dramatic. Okay, now, if you pay attention right now, we have 2 words over here. One is scientist, one is dramatic. According to the author, as in this case Burke, he has 2 different ideas of of how the language could be. And to help me out over here, I have the arrow. So let's start off with scientist. According to the author, or in this case Burke, the scientist provides knowledge and received and perceived through the medium of the senses in the roles of bearers of information. Now, using this actual font over here, he is more plain. The wording is a lot more plain. It is more straight to the point. It shows no barriers in this case over here. Now let's look at the word dramatics. According to Burke, according to Burke, is basically he is the bearer of tribal compulsions, provides the oratory language of thou shalt not, and the very idea of the negative, the ability to distinguish the yes and the no of right and wrong. So a dramatic could be, in other words, like your pastor, your priest, your rabbi, in this particular case, or someone who gives you the news every night. So that is why I purposely use the scientist and dramatics as a way to prove a point on how people see the wordings over here. Okay, the next three subsections are actually based on the actual article that I have read. And to help me out, we're going to be looking at it from three different examples over here. Now, again, I will be using the pointer to make a point. The first point I'm going to be talking to you about, of course, is the role of self-will. According to the author, using Burke, here's basically what he's saying about voluntary submission to the role of self-will or dutiful constraint or the discipline of reason. And his argument is the respect for the law is a conscience of a free submission to the will of the law. So in this case, though, when President Reagan was talking about saying no to drugs, as well as First Lady Nancy Reagan talking about the first rule of law, it basically gives the American people of choice. As you already know, America is a land of choice. The choice to say yes to drugs, the choice to say no to drugs. But overall, the role of self-will gives the individual the right to basically have a conscious decision to say yes or no. I mean, we see that every year, especially around a time like when the election's coming up. So the role of self-will: are you willing to say yes to life? Are you willing to say no to drugs? The choice is yours. But mainly, the main choice, of course, is to say no because of the ongoing effort in the war on drugs. Now, in the actual speech itself, President Reagan said this: "In this crusade, let's not forget who we are. Drug abuse is a repudiation of everything America is. The destructiveness and the human wreckage mock our heritage. Think for a moment how special it is to be an American." Don't you see? Reagan used patriotism as a way to argue the role of self-will. You know, just like back in the 1950s and early 60s, on how propaganda films try to point out the problems of being a communist. The same thing you could say about with President Reagan when he mentioned that in this case drugs are mainly a communist effort. But on a more serious note, the role of self-will gives people the idea to choose, and using patriotism as a backdrop to remind people that as a citizen you are free to choose. You have a right to say no. You have a right to be free in any step of the way. So that's one thing. I do apologize for that. The next thing I'd like to talk to you about is the universal no. According to the authors wrote this interesting remark. Speaking of the negative as a specific marvel of language, Burke explains the dilemma of the negative in nature. But as so far as nature is concerned, whatever is not there is positively somewhere else. So basically, the universal no gives you the idea that basically the universal idea of no is basically that this is not just a local thing. This is a national thing. This is an international thing. And it also points out in this particular article. Let me just read this word for word. Once the popularity of the Just Say No campaign vis-a-vis drugs was assured, the negative morality soon expanded to other realms of personal rights and social issues. Basically, it is expanded onto another subject matter: AIDS. As you know, the 1980s was a very conservative time for most people, and once the AIDS virus was discovered, a lot of people basically have this negative notion that AIDS can be carried through different ideas. In short, there was a lot of ignorance involved in terms of the AIDS crisis. And yes, this was a personal thing for our family as well. So when AIDS first started coming around, hysteria, not education, was the main norm over here. And therefore, President Reagan, using the same techniques he used with drugs, basically he's telling people to say no to AIDS. And by no, we mean, of course, not have any sexual contact. Of course, if you're practicing safe sex, wear a condom. And of course, don't share needles. So, the authors made it clear by the Just Say No campaign used to use the negative to provide a moralistic, transcending sensory into social problems. The evils are fought against in every case, though. So that's pretty much one way of looking at it. Another thing we need to look at is absolution. Again, the authors make it clear that something is right and wrong. It's all, in other words, it's clearly about choice. It's not about yes, it's not about no, it's all about choice. It's all about having the right morality in this case. And one last bit of note, there's one more thing I forgot to mention, and that is victimization. What is victimization, you ask? Now, is basically looking for someone to take responsibility. As I was saying, victimization, according to Burke, was basically have someone basically trying to find a scapegoat for all the problems. You know, and the authors reference Burke. For the victim, there's possibility there, but the most thoroughly materialistic sense. Insofar, there's a scapegoat. So in short, they blame, basically, the Reagans blame it on promiscuity, of course. There's also basically a lot of things. There's no personal responsibility over here. It was always about blaming somebody else, not taking responsibility for their actions. It was always about finding someone. And in some cases, it could be those who are poor, those who are downtrodden, those who are in more urban areas that are the responsible items for the big epidemic, especially with regards to AIDS, drugs, and especially crack and cocaine. Finally, then, what can we conclude from all this article in regarding the Reagan's approach to drug problems as well as AIDS? The authors basically clearly point out that the idea that it is up to the individual to fight the war on drugs is as simple as it can get, as according to the authors of this particular peer study review. However, it is more complex than you actually think, especially when you have to deal with a bigger world out there, especially when you had the drugs coming from different places, from South America, etc., and there's a lot of corrupt politicians in that sense. So basically, they tried to cover it all up by using the Just Say No campaign to make it as simple to the viewers, to those in power, to the students, just to keep it simple, because there was a bigger problem at hand. So in conclusion, this article was merely a way to reflect on the first part of the drug campaign, and how Nancy Reagan and her husband Ronald used the power of television and way before social media, and using celebrities to let people know that drugs are indeed bad. So thank you so much for watching, and make it a good one.